Do you know why? Why this clarification?
I did not, I was not the sponsor of the legislation, so I cannot speak for the commissioner who sponsored it. But I do know that it was subsequent in time to the decision of the ethics board that the district attorney was not covered by our code of ethics.
So there was an ethics complaint brought about the receipt of gifts, and it was determined that your existing ordinance or code, ethics code, did not apply.
Yes, sir. The Board of Ethics determined that it did not have jurisdiction under the current ethics code.
And the county commission has subsequently here in recent months amended that ethics code to make it clear that it does apply to constitutional officers such as the DA and the sheriff and the tax commissioner.
Yes, I believe that was passed on April 17th or thereabouts.
Yeah, very recently. All right, Mr. Chairman, tell us about that.
Well, I can't add anything to what the county attorney has said. It came about, and I supported it when it came up. There's some loopholes, so we're trying to close all loopholes.
Okay. Is it and so that is now, has been enacted, a recent ordinance or ethics code for the county?
Yes, sir.
And it now does require the district attorney and other constitutional officers to disclose gifts of more than a nominal amount.
I think that's how it's worded.
Okay.
But it covers the district attorney and others, all elected officials.
Right. What about reporting of gifts that are above $100 or a nominal amount? Are you required to report those or simply banned from receiving them?
I'd have to check the exact language in the code.
Sue will be looking while we talk. So just on a sort of philosophical level,
Yes, sir.
why do you feel like that was needed or that type of ban is appropriate for elected officials, including constitutional officers?
Well, I wasn't the sponsor of the legislation,
Right.
but
you voted for it? Or?
I voted for it, yeah, to close any loopholes, so to remove any doubt as to, who's covered, who's not covered, because the idea is for us to be open and transparent about what we're doing.
Okay. And is there an appearance of impropriety if you were to receive kickbacks or things of benefit from folks that were contractors or vendors of the county?
Okay, repeat that one.
Is there an appearance of impropriety or wrongdoing for elected officials to receive kickbacks or things of benefit from vendors or independent contractors of the county?
Well, I would say if it's over whatever that amount is, then that would be a problem.
Okay. And is the reason is that your independent judgment and acting on behalf of the people brought into question if you're receiving things of benefit from those that you're doing business with?
Well, I mean, we want to be above reproach. I guess that's used quite a bit by elected officials, and that's the intent, so that we are above reproach and that we are open and fair in our dealings. And we have blackout periods where we cannot even contact to those who are seeking to do business with the county.
Even though it was recently determined that the ethics provisions did not apply to constitutional officers, did DA Willis fill those type of disclosure forms out, those gift forms, in the past?
I'm not aware of it. I don't know about that.
Okay.
I've not seen.
What about
any
Paul Howard? Did he fill those type of forms out in the past?
I have no knowledge of that. Yeah.
Yes, he wasn't using independent contractors anyway, right?
I don't recall him using the special prosecutor. So I'm not aware.
Has the
But
county?
I have not reviewed what other elected officials are, reporting.
Has the county commission ever come in and asked any agency heads or constitutional officers to terminate or void or alter any contracts with independent contractors or vendors?
Okay, repeat the question.
Has the county commission ever come in and asked for department heads or constitutional officers to terminate or void or amend or change any contracts that they might have entered into with independent contractors or outside vendors?
The question is, has the county ever asked someone to void an independent vendor contract? I don't know that that's. We've not. No, all you did was pull the funding. You did not ask them to
Yeah.
void the contract.
Here's a recent contract, not, excuse me, not involving the district attorney, but we didn't ask the department head to. We did not ask the department head to terminate the contract. We simply terminated the funding of the contract, and the effect of that was to terminate the contract.
And in Ms. Willis's case, you wouldn't have been able to terminate her contract with Mr. Wade because you can't control the funding of that?
All right, let me make sure I understand the question.
So Ms. Wade had a contract with Mr. Wade to be special prosecutor as an independent contractor. And you have not asked her to terminate that agreement. The judge ultimately did, but a county commission never.
The board did not.
Okay.
No, sir.
And was that because you approved of that arrangement, or because you didn't think you had the authority to require her to terminate that arrangement?
Because we did not have the authority, because she had the authority to hire the special prosecutor.
When did that first come to your attention, or the board's attention, that she had entered into a contract for a special prosecutor, Mr. Wade, to handle this election integrity case?
Me personally?
Yeah.
During the media coverage on it.
So you didn't even know it until the media erupted back in the fall sometime?
That's correct.
What was your response or your reaction, both personally as in your capacity as chairman of the commission?
Well, since we believe that we did not have any control over her decisions, that it was her decision to hire the special prosecutor, that we had no role in it.
Could you have cut the funding off for that, just like you did this other contract recently?
We didn't know anything about it.
It had not even been disclosed to you as a commission?
No, sir.
Okay. What are your views on the propriety of elected official hiring somebody under an independent contract arrangement that they had an intimate personal relationship with?
Well, my personal views on.
Yeah.
I believe our revised code of ethics covers a situation like that. It's been amended. Is that correct?
The revised code that you support would prohibit that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It was, the definition, I think, was expanded to include personal relationships.
Yeah. Ms. Joe, can you elucidate us any on this? You're leaning forward in your seat as if you might have some information for me there.
I did not intend to lean forward like that.
Be careful, I'm watching.
I don't want to speak for the chairman, but I believe the recent enactment that he is referring to is a new anti-nepotism policy
Right.
that would cover personal relationships of this nature between an official and an independent contractor.
Okay. Is that a new ordinance as well?
It
Or has that
is.
been there?
It is. Our prior ordinance was located within the Civil Service Act, so it was limited in its application to employees and would not have applied to independent contractors.
Would it have applied to employees of the DA's office?
Yes.
Okay. So if Mr. Wade had been hired as an assistant DA, it would have violated the then existing nepotism policy?
Assuming that they had that type of relationship, yes.
Okay. I think that's been admitted by both parties at this point, right? You keep up with the press, correct? I mean,
Yes, but in our hypothetical, I mean, it depends on the timing.
yeah. So the amendment was to expand on your existing anti-nepotism clause that would prohibit superior from having a relationship, intimate relationship with an employee, to include independent contractors in that ban.
In effect, yes,
Okay.
it expands it, but it had to do it through a separate policy because the original policy is within our Civil Service Act and therefore limited in application to employees. So there is a separate policy that is a county-wide application that prohibits all of the same things that also applies to independent contractors because it is not limited by the scope of the Civil Service Act.
And that was enacted when?
I believe that would also be April.
All right.
Was it April?
April 7th.
So both of
April
these,
17th as well,
both of these, your ethics policies, your anti-nepotism, your gift,
have recently
Yes.
been expanded.
and they were expanded to capture this type of situation that we're dealing with here with Ms. Willis and Mr. Wade.
Had they been in place, both would have captured this, would have applied in this instance.
Okay. And was there any rationale for not including independent contractors in the past, or was that just an oversight?
That is well, I will say these are all fairly well-established older policies, but as to the anti-nepotism policy specifically, I think the limitation is simply where it was located, which is the Civil Service Act.
And because it was located in that act, it was not deemed
It
to
could not apply to anyone but employees.
Okay. Do you know whether the district attorney's office has a separate sort of ethics guideline or ordinance or rules?
I'm not aware. I presume there are state guidelines that would apply as being a state officer, but I'm not aware of any that are specific to her office.
Okay. One of the things that was brought forward in one of our previous hearings is that Ms. Willis entered into an independent contract for essentially a publicist, a PR firm to help guide and monitor publicity. Is that the type of contract that the county would need to approve or fund?
I'm not aware of that contract, but it would, again, back to this constitutional officer and her being somewhat of a constitutional officer. I mean, there's a sheriff, the tax commissioner, and a couple of others that are a little different from the district attorney. But if she had, and your question is about the district attorney,
Yeah.
if she had the funds in her budget, then she could, without coming to us, coming back to the board seeking approval.
Did she ever ask for funding for a PR firm out of New York City in her different budget request? Is that anything in the line item, Ms. Whitmore? She was asking for $36 million. She explained part of it would be spent for a New York City PR firm to monitor her publicity.
Not that I recall. I would have to research that.
Mr. Chairman, is that something that the Board of Commissioners would ordinarily approve or budget for various departments?
Well, again, if that's not something that we would, as a matter of course, routinely be aware of, and I can't recall ever of a request like that coming before the board. But if it's in a department's budget, particularly a constitutional officer's budget, and he or she feels that that's what they need, then if they have the funds under this umbrella of a constitutional officer, they can do it.
But you're the one that has to approve those funds, because I can assure you that's not in our state budget.
Well,
We don't give PR money to DA's offices.
We wouldn't be funding that specific line item. We would be funding whatever she requested. Then once the money is approved, then the constitutional officer once the constitutional officer's budget has been approved, they can make changes as they deem appropriate.
Does your Board of Commissioners have a contract with any type of media monitoring service or public relations service?
Does the Board of Commissioners?
Yes, sir.
As a board, no, sir.
Okay. Would you approve that type of funding if she had specifically requested it?
Would the board have?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't speak for the entire board, but knowing the board as I do, probably not. For the purpose that you've outlined, probably not.
Okay. You learned, I guess, the same way the rest of us did back in the fall as essentially the media reported this relationship between Ms. Willis and Mr. Wade. What type of pressure was put on the Board of Commissioners, or was it anybody complained to you, or was it frustrating that you couldn't do anything about it? I'm curious what the reaction was from the board when all this scandal erupted.
Well, there's no pressure on the board per se. I mean, individual constituents, may have commented, here and there, but there's no, I didn't feel any pressure. Obviously, people would comment on what they had seen or heard or read, and I'm sure that's true for the rest of the board as well, but no pressure.
Yeah. You've kind of explained here today that the board really has no supervisory authority or control over how Ms. Willis spends the dollars that you budget for her, but the public is had the presumption, until you're clarifying it here now, that the board approved this device of using an independent contractor as a special prosecutor. It helped fund this election integrity case, and a number of attorneys, both private contractors and assistant DAs, being engaged in it, and endorsed or didn't disapprove of the relationship between Mr. Wade and Ms. Willis. What is your reaction or response to that? Just kind of like you told us today that's out of your control. You may not approve it, but can't stop it or prevent it.
Well, you just said a lot now, and
Yeah.
and I can't.
I'm sorry about
Can't follow all of that.
All right. Okay.
So if you could repeat, I mean, the last.
Maybe I can break it down.
Yes, sir.
Do you feel like the Fulton County Board of Commissioners supported this election integrity case, or 16 cases, either by financially supporting her to pursue those cases?
Well, I don't think the board, the board had no position or has no position on it. The district attorney, as I understand how district attorneys operate, they are free to choose the cases that they get involved in.
Okay.
And we as a board have no input into that.
You were never educated about that before the fact,
About
those prosecutions, election integrity cases?
I mean, was the board informed that
Yeah.
the district attorney was going to?
You've made it clear she didn't specifically ask for funding for that prosecution or for the hiring of special assistant district attorneys to lead that prosecution. Did you
That's
even
correct.
know that was happening and that you were funding that even if it was in the big chunk of money?
No, we're not advised of her work program, if you will. I mean, we provide funding for her, and she sets her own work program, and I think that's probably true for, as I understand it, for all district attorneys.
Okay. There was testimony before us in previous meetings about Ms. Willis and Mr. Wade making trips to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Justice Department, and in Ms. Willis's part, I think, meeting with the Vice President of the United States. Does, I guess this may not be best for you, but I guess, Ms. Whitmore, were you aware of any expenditures for that? I mean, that was paid for with taxpayer money. Is that something that's reported, or you track that they're spending your general funds to travel and meet with the Vice President and the Justice Department?
We do record their travel expenses. I was not and have not reviewed the district attorney's office travel, the details. So I had no knowledge of what her individual, travel arrangements would have been, but their travel requests and transactions are, if they're paid for out of county resources, there is a reconciliation process that is undertaken by the traveler. If they're using the county's procurement card or travel card to pay for the travel, then there is a detailed process that they have to go through for that. But at my level, I'm not necessarily involved in looking at or reviewing any of those transactions.
Those type of travel expenses, do they require any prior approval by the county or by your office?
Our travel policy allows the elected officials to approve the travel for their staff and to approve the travel for themselves.
And you mentioned the procurement card. Is that what we call a P card?
Yes, sir. We use both a P card for non-travel related credit card purchases, and then we have a separate card that we call a T card, T for travel. So departments have both, one for basically goods and services and one that is for travel. So the county's policy is a reimbursement-based policy, so the traveler can pay for their travel expenses directly and seek reimbursement, or the county will prepay using the T card, and then the reconciliation process follows the trip.
Explain that reconciliation process. Let's say somebody uses a T card to take a trip to California or whatever. It gets charged directly to the county through that essentially credit card?
Yes, every department has a single travel card holder, and the individual traveler is required to coordinate their travel needs with the travel card holder. Travel card holder makes all of the arrangements and charges for that card, and the traveler, if they're traveling for official county business, is expected to return and supply through Concur. We use the Concur platform for our travel reconciliation process. They're expected to provide the receipts, hotel, evidence, if it was a conference, evidence that they attended the conference, and any other receipts that they may have where they are seeking reimbursement. So that is, when I refer to the reconciliation process, that is what I'm referring to from the traveler's perspective. And then each month, the travel card holder is required to pull their bank statement for the card and complete the reconciliation process for that bank statement for that period, so that we can process payment to the financial institution that we use for our credit card purposes.
So is Ms. Willis the T-card holder for the district attorney's office?
I don't believe she is, no, sir.
Okay. So it would be some designated employee of the DA's office would handle that?
Yes, sir.
And at the reconciliation stage each month, they would submit the receipts from each member of that agency or department that had utilized the card?
For the charges, they would need to submit the requested documentation for the charges on the card for that statement.
Okay. Are there limits as to say, could you put somebody up in a Ritz-Carlton versus a Holiday Inn? Are there caps on how much you're allowed to spend on
So
lodging or travel?
Our policy does outline those type of limitations, yes, sir.
And if somebody exceeds those limitations, do you simply cut the reimbursement off at whatever your cap is or your guideline calls for?
If they have requested an exception, so say they're traveling to an area and there are no hotels available, it's a conference, there are no hotels available at the host hotel and they have to move to a different location and the rates are higher, they can ask for an exception to that and seek approval for that. But otherwise, they may be charged back for those costs that are outside of the allowances allowed through the travel policy.
Does the department head have the power to override those allowances, create exceptions, as I think you said?
Exceptions are required to be approved in advance and by the county manager or his designee.
Do these rules that you've just outlined apply to the district attorney's office?
These rules apply to anyone who travels using the county's, seeking reimbursement from the county using the county's travel policy or the county's T-card.
Who is the custodian of these documents, the reconciliation process and the payments made under the various T-cards and P-cards?
The purchasing department is the administrator of the T-card and P-card program. Ultimately, the final reconciliation packages are received and retained by the finance department.
Are they under your purview?
Both of those are, yes, sir.
Okay. So you could get me that information if I properly requested it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Pitts, you are on the audit committee of the commission.
Yes, sir.
Is that by virtue of your position as the commission chairman, or is it a subset of the commission? How's that created?
Let's see. I think it's a 5-member committee, I believe, and 2 commissioners sit on that committee, and they're appointed or nominated and appointed by the board.
And currently, you are on the audit committee?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is Bob Ellis the other commissioner?
Yeah.
Right.
Commissioner Ellis is chair of the audit committee.
And who would the other 3 members be then, if you are the 2 commissioners?
The private citizens.
And what's the authority or the power of that audit committee? What's the role of the audit committee?
Well, we work with the county auditor, Mr. Anthony Nix, and to provide audits for various departments, areas when we see or feel that need to be looked into from an audit point of view, whether it's financial or programmatic or otherwise.
I know only what I've read in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about this, but apparently there was a recent audit report that had been requested by the audit committee.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about that. What was that audit for?
I believe you're referring to the audit that was done at the request of the audit committee. We utilized an outside firm called Cherry Beckert, nationally recognized firm, to look at and review and it wasn't really an audit, it was a review of our purchasing, primarily purchasing requirements, processes within the county, and looking at all departments, but focused in on the sheriff's department and the district attorney's office in particular.
And did that Cherry Beckert, is that how you?
Beckert, yes, sir.
Did it produce a written audit report of its work?
It did.
Okay. And was that presented to the commission
Yes.
or just to your committee?
No, it was presented to the commission, and we had 2 representatives from the firm make a presentation to the full board a couple of meetings ago, maybe 3 meetings ago.
Did this audit reflect any irregularities or improprieties in spending by the sheriff's department?
There were, I'm going from memory, we can make the full report audit. Well, it was really a review and not an audit, but it was an audit firm, nationally recognized firm. And again, they focused on the sheriff's department and the district attorney. And there were 2 sets of recommendations, and I don't recall the specific recommendations, but with respect to the sheriff, I think they used a term of, do you remember the term? Was it high? High power. Is that it? Yeah. So the conclusion was the county sheriff's office risk level, they call it, was high, and it lists certain areas. And with respect to the district attorney, the risk level was medium.
Did it list particular areas that there was a medium risk for impropriety by the district attorney's office?
Well, I can read from the document here. The use of prosecutorial discretion as a justification comes with the risk of it being used with greater frequency, with more purchases being made over time outside of county rules and procedures.
And that expenditures that we're talking about?
Purchases.
Okay, are those purchases using a P card or a T card, or is it identified?
Probably a combination of both.
Ms. Whitmore?
Prosecutorial discretion are typically the items that the district attorney engages in directly. Expert witnesses, if there's any special evidence processing that has to take place, any visual aids maybe that need to be supplied as part of trial, any extraordinary trial expenses. Typically, the district attorney engages and secures those goods and services outside of our county procurement process, which is the reference to the prosecutorial discretion, I think is the word that they use.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Would that include travel expenses for witnesses being brought in from out of state?
Those should be following the county's travel policy. It does have a section that deals with extradition and witnesses. Again, but it applies if you're using the paying for it with county resources, seeking reimbursement, or using the county's travel card.
Would that include special prosecutors, independent contractor prosecutors?
The DA's use of prosecutorial discretion, yes.
So that's captured by this category that
Yes.
the audit report is saying
Yes, sir.
you got some moderate potential for abuse here. Did they specify any particular expenses that seem to be inappropriate in this report or this review?
Probably in the larger report, there were some instances, but I'll have to provide that to you because that's not in this document that I'm looking at now.
Okay. Ms. Whitmore, have you provided that document? You've given me a book full of things. I don't know how much made it to it yet, but you're still in progress.
I have not. The subpoena asked for audits.
You don't consider this an audit, and it's just a review?
Yeah, it was a review, so I did not include it. But
Could you voluntarily provide me a copy of that report that you have as well as the full report? this review?
Sue, is that sufficient? Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Noting it now.
I'm sorry, what?
I appreciate that. There were a number of references to Ms. Willis having significant expenditures for her personal security detail. Is that something that was presented to you in a budget request?
So, repeat that one, sir.
There has been testimony before the committee about the district attorney, Ms. Willis, having significant expenditures for a personal security detail that may even travel with her on these trips that she takes. Is that something that was presented to the commission as a part of a budget request, the cost of that?
I don't know whether or not, as a matter of course, the district attorney has a security detail. I don't know the answer to that.
Did Mr. Howard ever have a security detail?
I know that he had, we had some security enhancements around his home at one point because of some threats that he received.
Okay.
Now, with respect to District Attorney Willis, again, I don't know whether she routinely had a security detail or whether we paid for one. But in this particular instance, because of the YSL trial in particular, and
What does
the
YSL stand for?
Young Slime Life, I believe. Isn't that
Okay,
correct? Is that
so
right?
that's
Young Slime Life.
That's the gang-related
Correct.
prosecution's been going on for a year now.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Because of that trial and the election interference, it came to us in executive session that she was receiving, as were a number of us, me included,
Yeah.
particularly during the election back in 2020. I had a detail with me, but because of the YSL trial and the election interference, she was receiving threats, bodily harm, pretty serious. So a report was made to us about that in executive session, and a request came to us on her behalf to provide additional security for her. And after listening to what was going on, we, the board, listened, and then in open session decided and voted to provide additional security for her.
What's the cost been for that additional security, and is it continuing up until today?
I don't know whether it's continuing, but do you have the cost of the security?
As I recall, the full ask that was presented included relocation, as well as some hardening of her personal residence, and law enforcement support from at least 2 outside jurisdictions. I don't recall what all of the amounts were, nor can I tell you that I have seen an invoice from either of those other external jurisdictions. The relocation costs run about $4,000 a month.
Was that relocation cost renting her this condominium where she and Mr. Wade would meet?
I don't know the physical address of either of those locations, so I really wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Do you know who you were making the payments to for this, for the rent?
We do. I do not, but I certainly know who we cut a check. Well, I know how to obtain who we cut a check to,
Okay.
but I don't see those expenses every month.
Has that continued, the relocation expense? I mean, essentially, the county is providing extra security at her personal home, but also renting her a separate location she can live in or sleep at. Now, I'm not going to ask you to disclose that location. Is that continuing?
The expenses are continuing.
And how long have they been going on?
I believe they began in the later portion of 2022. I don't recall the exact date. I would have to research that.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Joe, you had mentioned this, I don't know if I'm calling it a civil rights office, but what is the county's structure for receiving complaints of employment discrimination against the county or any agency of it?
So employees who have complaints regarding their employment conditions have a couple of different possible routes. One of them is DCRC, and I am blanking on what the acronym stands for, but I think it's the
Diversity and Civil Rights Compliance.
Okay, so it is. We've
Diversity and Civil Rights Compliance?
Yes, we've kind of outsourced our initial point of contact for EEOC type violations internally, and that is done outside of my office. And then at some point in the process, we may get involved later on down the road, but it begins at DCRC. And then we also have a whistleblower hotline that is established that routes to our county auditor, and whistleblower complaints can be investigated in that manner as well. So those are the two
by the auditor
primary
or
routes.
DCRA?
DCRC.
DCRC, okay. Is that a confidential process?
I would say so. It is confidential even from me at the outset unless it develops into litigation or an EEOC complaint. So it should be confidential from the employee's point of view when they present the complaint.
Does the employee's employer learn of such a complaint? Some type of employment violation?
Employer meaning their manager or whoever they are the subject of their complaint?
Right.
I would not expect that person to be made aware unless and until there's a point in the investigation where that becomes necessary in order to obtain necessary information.
Like their explanation or defense?
Yes, when they would be made aware of the complaint in order to provide a response.
Okay. And insofar as the whistleblower hotline, that's confidential as well, I would presume?
Yes, under state whistleblower laws, the identity of the whistleblower is kept confidential for as long as possible.
And does the county have its own whistleblower policy?
The county does also have a whistleblower policy.
Is that a written policy?
I have not looked at it in probably over a decade.
Wow.
I believe it's an ordinance that mirrors the state whistleblower statute, but I would have to confirm that.
Does it prohibit retaliation against somebody for bringing forth a complaint of impropriety or wrongdoing?
Yeah, I would expect that it does include that, because if it mirrors the statute, then it would include the anti-retaliation provisions.
So how long have you been with the county attorney's office?
2.5 years as the county attorney, and then 10 years prior to coming back as the county attorney, I was a line attorney in the office for 4 years. So.
Okay. What do you make of this constitutional officer argument, so to speak, that constitutional officers are not subject to any supervision or control by the county commission?
So, are you asking for my personal opinion or my understanding of the state of the law?
I'd love to have them both. Let's start with the law, because
What's up?
we may be looking for ways to change laws, and I'd be interested in your personal views from your experience.
So, as to the state of the law, I will say that the challenge presented for my office, for the board, and to some extent I would imagine for the officers involved, is that there is this inherent conflict created by the state of the law, wherein there are certain elected officials who are essentially embedded with the county, provided facilities by the county, provided either employees or supplemental employees by the county, equipment by the county, a budget for operations by the county. Those officials must interact with the county, for example, in order to process payment vouchers. They have to come back to the county, even in instances where they may have independence or latitude in contracting, for example. They still need to come back to the county finance department in order to get a check cut, in order to pay on these contracts that they may have control over, but they can't cut a check directly to the vendor. So there is this kind of built-in tug of war where two parties who are essentially operating independently, one is funding another without any necessary input or oversight into the process or any of the contracting, but essentially is on the hook when it comes to processing the payments, when it comes to supplementing budgets after the fact in order to make up for budgetary shortfalls because of those expenditures, and ultimately may be left with the legal liability and exposure should there be any issue with the way in which those services were obtained. So I do believe there are some practical and legal challenges for all counties and elected officials who are in this kind of in-between state where you have independence, but you depend on the county for finances and processing, and where the county has an obligation to fund, but doesn't have any control over ensuring any kind of standards or protocols in the expenditure of those funds.
Very well stated. If you are probably as knowledgeable in this interface of the county governments and state elected officials or county elected officials, in the case of a DA, as any attorney around, if you have suggestions to our committee on how we could clean this up a bit through statutory amendments or modifications, please feel free to give those to me. Okay. And while I have you there at the witness chair, I, as the county attorney, I have mentioned to you sort of pre-meeting, if there are any documents that you have produced to us so far, you've got the whole notebook in front of you, or that you may produce in the future as you complete the document production that you feel like it contain confidential personal information or otherwise privileged information, please identify that to me. You've been so good here to have all these documents bait stamped so we can very clearly identify which pages you're talking about. Then I will treat them as confidential within this committee. We will not be making these documents public other than available for review of committee members until I hear back from you, hopefully in the next week or two.
Thank you,
Fair
Mr.
enough?
Chairman.
Okay, thank you.